Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is the 8th webinar in this year's series. And again, I just want to mention the theme for the webinar series this year. It is Forming Citizens for This World and for Heaven. And my goodness, is tonight relevant for that. We have a wonderful presentation, Monumental Women, Remembering Holy Cross Sisters at Notre Dame and in America. And as we think about becoming better citizens of this world, and as we think about striving to become saints, we always look to those who have come before us, and that's exactly what we're going to be doing this evening. So we are truly in for a treat. We have a wonderful, very distinguished guest, Dr. Kathleen Sprose-Cummings, who I'll be introducing in just a moment, joining us from the University of Notre Dame. We are so excited to have her with us tonight. So one more time, folks, if you're so inclined, put your name and where you're coming from into the chat. We'd love to see where everyone is joining us from this evening. Brother George, we're so glad to have you. Thank you for joining us. Okay. Oh, it looks like we have another special guest joining us, our Executive Director, Dr. Clark. Hello, Dr. Clark. Wonderful to have you. Coming in from an airport in Philadelphia, that's commitment. Sister Rachel from New Hampshire, thank you so much for joining us. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and get started. Joseph Howe, great to have you. One of our researchers with the Holy Cross Institute from Austin. Great to have you, Joseph. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started for this evening. My name is Megs Turgeon. I'm the Assistant Director of the Holy Cross Institute. And as we typically do, we like to say a little bit about the Holy Cross Institute, who we are and what we do before we begin with our presentation for the evening. So the Holy Cross Institute, as many of you know, is a partnership between the Moreau and Midwest provinces of the Brothers of Holy Cross and St. Edward's University, which of course is a Brothers of Holy Cross university. And so we are here to preserve and to promote the legacy of Holy Cross and to provide transformational opportunities and networking opportunities for those within the family of Holy Cross, which in a moment we'll see is a very vast and expansive family. And so here's a little bit about what we do. We follow what we call the IFT pedagogical model, and that stands for information, formation, and transformation. So those are the three things that we do. We provide information through resources and academic research, through our webinar series. We have a prayer publication series, through conferences. I want to remind everyone, we just had our most recent convocation at the end of March. Our upcoming convocation will be March 1st through the 3rd, 2023. So keep that on your calendars, ladies and gentlemen. We also have workshops, training, and other professional services that we offer. Of course, we have a special focus on formation, on forming our Holy Cross educators and our Holy Cross leaders, as well as our Holy Cross students. And so we have an emphasis on leadership development and executive coaching. We host retreats for a number of those within the Holy Cross leadership community. And the ultimate goal of what we do is transformation. So what we seek to do here at the Holy Cross Institute is to unify, to unite the world of Holy Cross, which is spread out across 6 continents, as we'll see in just a moment. We have more than 120 schools, colleges, and universities in over 21 countries, or in 21 countries. And as Moreau said, unity is a great lever by which we can move, direct, and sanctify the whole world. And so we seek to unite the family that is Holy Cross. We'd love to have you join the conversation and see what the Holy Cross Institute is up to. So you can find us on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter. We have our own YouTube channel. We have a monthly newsletter that you can subscribe to. And I also want to point out the Daily Moreau app, which you see on the bottom of your screen. You can download that for free on the Google Play and the Apple App stores. A special thank you to Brother Joel Gialanza, James Puglisi, and Kim Garza, and our own AJ Valverde for making this a possibility. We thank you so much. If you want to stay grounded in Holy Cross, what better way to do that than to have a daily quote or reflection from the writings of Father Moreau. Next slide, please. So here's that beautiful map that I was just mentioning. It shows the 28 K through 12 schools that we have here, sponsored by Holy Cross in the United States, as well as the 8 Holy Cross colleges and universities. You can see we're spread from coast to coast. It's truly tremendous. And in this bottom right-hand corner, you can see our international reach. Moving from our humble origins in rural France, we have spread to 21 countries and 6 continents. We, at any given time, are educating over 110,000 students in over 120 schools and universities around the world. So it's just a tremendous delight and honor to be a part of this family that is Holy Cross. Next slide, please. So we begin all things in prayer. And so this is a prayer that was written for the purpose of these webinars. And so I'm going to be leading us in prayer this evening. And so friends, please join me in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, following the example of your Son, you have called us to participate in building your kingdom of justice, love, and peace. As we endeavor to do this work, we ask you to send forth your Spirit, our great helper, to infuse us with heavenly virtues. Instill in us, we pray, an abiding respect for human life and dignity, a firm resolve to serve our communities, a keen awareness of our responsibilities toward our neighbors, an unyielding commitment to the poor and vulnerable, a high regard for workers and the dignity of their labor, a deep-seated solidarity with the suffering and oppressed, and a benevolent spirit of stewardship over your creation. Rescue us, we pray, from the injustices we suffer and the injustices we inflict, so that as one human family, we may attain to the freedom and flourishing for which you have created us. Grant us, Father, the competence to see these injustices and the courage to act against them. This mission is yours, and so is the strength to accomplish it. Be with us then as we strive to be virtuous citizens of this present world, and as we train to become saintly citizens of your heavenly kingdom. We thank you in a special way for the gift of our speaker this evening. We ask your blessing upon her. Grant her the gifts of wisdom, eloquence, and conviction, that she may inspire us to action on your behalf. And grant us, her listeners, eyes to see and ears to hear. We ask this and all things through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Next slide, please. So, ladies and gentlemen, we don't have a sponsor for this evening's webinar, but I do want to invite anyone who's interested in partnering with the Holy Cross Institute in any kind of way. If you're interested in sponsoring one of our future webinars, we invite you to reach out to us. You can contact our executive director, Dr. Marco Clark, at the email address on this page, and we'll have our contact information at the end of this presentation as well. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so without further ado, let me introduce to you our presenter for this evening. So a story first. Several months ago, our executive director, Dr. Clark, came across an outstanding article in last year's winter edition of Notre Dame magazine titled "The Women of Past Presence," which outlined the tragic fading of the legacy of the Holy Cross sisters from Notre Dame's institutional memory. Dr. Clark was profoundly struck by the article and deeply concerned with the story it told, and so he quickly shared it with the Institute team. And needless to say, it made a deep impression on all of us. As an institute committed to preserving the rich legacy of Holy Cross and uniting the larger Holy Cross family, we were all deeply saddened by this tragic overlooking of the Holy Cross sisters, and so decided that we wanted to highlight this important story. The author of this incredible article was none other than our speaker for this evening, Dr. Kathleen Sprouse Cummings, who the Holy Cross Institute has the distinct honor of introducing. Dr. Cummings is the director of the Cushwa Center for the Study of American Catholicism and is the Reverend John A. O'Brien Collegiate Professor of American Studies at the University of Notre Dame. She is a professor in the departments of American Studies and History, and is an affiliated faculty member in Gender Studies, Italian Studies, and the Nanovic Institute for European Studies at the university. She's also the former president of the American Catholic Historical Association and edits the American Catholic Studies newsletter. In conjunction with her expertise in American Catholicism, Dr. Cummings has devoted special attention to the subject of women in Catholicism, as well as sanctity and sainthood in the Catholic Church. She is the author of 2 critically acclaimed books, including A Saint of Our Own, How the Quest for a Holy Cross Hero Helped Catholics Become American, which was published in 2019, as well as New Women of the Old Faith, Gender and American Catholicism in the Progressive Era, which was published in 2009. Dr. Cummings has published dozens of academic articles, essays, and book reviews, and is both a leading scholar in her field and a widely acclaimed public intellectual whose expertise on Catholicism has been sought out by the New York Times, the Washington Post, the National Catholic Reporter, NBC, and NPR, to name just a few outlets. Dr. Cummings, we are so very fortunate to have you with us this evening. We are incredibly grateful to you for sharing your time with us and for sharing your expertise on this incredibly important topic. So without further ado, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Kathleen Sprouse Cummings.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, and thanks to Dr. Clark for the invitation, and to everyone at the Holy Cross Institute. I'm a big fan of St. Edward's University. I was able to visit twice. I gave the Bishop Clark lecture in 2010 and visited another time, and it's certainly great to be part of this community in this way. I see you put the link to the article in the chat, and that's great. I am going to mention some things that I wrote about in that article, but also try to situate it in a much larger framework, the story of Catholic sisters. But to start with the article, I wanted to say a word about its genesis. The editor of Notre Dame magazine, who's a good friend of mine, Carrie Temple, asked me to contribute an article over a year ago. He asked me to contribute an article to the issue that's coming out in just a few months, the summer issue, which is going to feature coeducation, the 50th anniversary of the admission of women to undergraduate education at Notre Dame. And I said, you know, Carrie, what I'd really like to write about is the women who arrived in 1843 and that we never talk about. And he said, sure, you can write about the Sisters of the Holy Cross. I knew that Sisters of the Holy Cross had been integral to the founding and development of the University of Notre Dame, but it wasn't until I started my research for this article that I realized just how integral they had been and how much their history has been not only forgotten, but it's fair to say erased on campus. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Just give me a minute here. Okay, sorry, I practiced before. I don't know where it went. There we go. Okay, sorry about that. So pictured on this title slide of the screen is a quote from Father John Kavanaugh, the president of Notre Dame between 1905 and 1919, and also a sister of the Holy Cross named Sister Mary Aloysius, born in Ireland. Honora Mulcair was her name, and she was born in Ireland in 1845, entered the Sisters of the Holy Cross in 1875, and died in 1916. Speaking at her funeral, Father Kavanaugh said that when the history of Notre Dame is completely written, no chapter in that beautiful and brilliant story will be more heroic than the part sisters have borne in the work. And as I'll talk about, that history has not really been written, and in fact, it's been forgotten. This is a story about Catholic sisters, but because this is based at St. Edward's University, and I know that there are brothers as well as sisters in the audience, it's also a story that many aspects of it apply to the story of Holy Cross brothers. But I want to go farther than that and say that it actually applies to it's not just a story about Notre Dame. It's not just a story about sisters. It's a story of how we remember people, and specifically who gets remembered and why. that's part of a national conversation we're having when we talk about removal of monuments, particularly monuments to Confederate soldiers, monuments that represent things that we no longer celebrate as a nation. I'm going to move now to a meme that I like to show in class that started circulating a couple of years ago, around the time we started to have debates about Confederate monuments. And it captures, as you know, as memes can do, it captures something very complicated in very simple terms. It shows that, you know, for me as a historian who spends a lot of time reading, a lot of times in archives, lots of paper, history is a very complicated thing and requires a lot of different sources and a lot of time to understand it. And so there are many people who suggested that in terms of when we remove monuments, we somehow erase history. Monuments always tell just part of the story. They necessarily tell only part of the story. And so that's why these conversations can often be more polarizing and pretty frustrating to people who are like me, who have kind of spent their lives studying history and trying to understand all the nuances and complexities. That said, there have been a number of wonderful things that have emerged from our conversation about monuments, and I want to talk about one of them now. The Mellon Foundation commissioned a national monument audit from the Monument Lab in Philadelphia. And this is just a little bit of information about how they really did they crowdsourced a search of who is remembered in our national landscape, statues or monoliths. And I want to highlight this definition: monument as a statement of power and presence in public. That's what monuments are. The national monument, and I have it linked, but you can find the full report. It's absolutely fascinating. But here's just a striking, some of their findings that I think are relevant to our conversation today. Monuments have always changed. So that's another aspect of this debate. We change our monuments all the time because what we celebrate changes. What we want to celebrate, who we want to highlight. Our priorities change. So as we change, who we honor, who we remember is going to change. The monument landscape is overwhelmingly white and male. And as you might expect, it really indicates America's long history with slavery. In fact, 50% of the top 50 people represented in national monuments enslaved other people. So that's another conversation about race and slavery that is possible to have. The most common features of American monuments reflect war and conquest. This is going to enter into our conversation tonight as well. And then the key finding is that the story of the United States as told by our current monuments actually misrepresents our history. And so there is, Megs talked in his introduction about inspiring people to change. And that's a point I want to get across. We have the power to change who we remember. We have the power to change our landscape. It's up to us whose stories we want to tell. This is a particularly, I think, arresting graphic. These are the top 50 individuals recorded in US public monuments. So just the image demonstrates one of the key findings: overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly male. In fact, we have to go all the way to number 18 on the list before we find our first female. And that is St. Joan of Arc is the most commonly represented person in monuments, which ties into that other finding about how war and conquest are overemphasized in our national monuments. Joan of Arc emerged as a symbol for French nationalists in the 19th century and became a really important symbol during World War I. If we go to 23, number 23 on the list, we have Harriet Tubman. And then at 28, we have Sacagawea. So only 3 women are in the top 50. Top 50 represented monuments. We do have some other Catholic saints. I just wanted to point out Junipero Serra is in there, a recent canonized saint, canonized in 2015, and St. Paul. And then the big one, I guess, is up at number 5. I think the first 4 are pretty, people could probably guess: Lincoln, Washington, Columbus, Martin Luther King. But at number 5, we have St. Francis of Assisi. So it's a good story for Franciscans. 2 of them are represented. So what this National Monument Audit has done is inspire people to work to change that landscape, to think about how can we tell a more complete story. So there's lots of things happening in order to do that. This is a recent installation of a statue honoring Harriet Tubman in Philadelphia in January of 2022 that was installed. It's a traveling statue. It will go to different places. In New York City, there is an effort called She Built NYC, which honors different New Yorkers. And in October of 2020, there was an installation in honor of Frances Cabrini. Frances Cabrini, the first US citizen to become a canonized saint, and herself a migrant from Italy who did arrive in New York in 1889, but also traveled all over the United States and in fact in South America as well. As a matter of fact, I'm here in Chicago, where I'm at a board meeting for the Cabrini Shrine in Chicago. So Chicago and New York kind of compete with her. She also has a shrine in Colorado, and in 2020, Colorado became the first state to change Columbus Day to Cabrini Day, and in so doing became the first state to have a paid holiday named after a woman. So many places have locales have changed Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day, but Colorado named it after Frances Cabrini. Nevertheless, Cabrini is not in the top 50. The highest ranking saint, Catholic nun in that list I showed you was actually Saint Elizabeth Ann Seton, who became the first American-born canonized saint, unlike Cabrini, who was a citizen, but a canonized saint. And the book that Meg's referenced in my introduction is actually about all causes for canonization that were introduced from the United States, but Seton got to be on the cover. So that's just, so she comes in, she's the only Catholic sister in the top 20 of, and probably a lot longer than that in terms of the top 20 represented in those monuments. Every diocese in the country, almost every diocese in the country, has a parish or school named after her. So what I want to do is I will get to the story of Holy Cross sisters at Notre Dame and beyond, but I want to think about them in terms of the American landscape. And the most significant permanent memorial to Catholic sisters is not to one nun, but actually to a group of Catholic nuns. And this is the Nuns of the Battlefield Monument, which is in Washington, D.C. This was dedicated on September 20th, 1924, designed by an Irish-born artist, well known for his lifelong portraits in bronze. His name was Jerome O'Connor. And you can't see it very well in a future slide, maybe get a better view, but it shows life-size figures of 12 sisters, each representing communities of women religious, including the Sisters of the Holy Cross, that served as nurses in the American Civil War. So the Sisters of the Holy Cross are represented here. And then there's allegorical figures at the two ends, the angel of patriotism on the north end and the angel of peace on the south. And inscriptions talking about the how sisters had offered comfort to the dying and to their memory and honor. So I want to talk a little bit about how this monument came to be, because it was really the single-handed effort of another woman who's been largely forgotten, certainly in Notre Dame history, and I think in American history more generally, a woman named Ellen Ryan Jolly, who was the national president of the Ladies Auxiliary to the Ancient Order of Hibernians, which is an organization that is still in existence. They have dropped the name Auxiliary. They are now the Ladies Ancient Order of Hibernians, and they're actually important friends of the Cushwa Center, the center that I direct. But Ellen Jolly was president in 1914, and she was, the early 20th century was a time when there was a lot of commemorations of Civil War veterans. And Jolly knew that on Memorial Day in 1911, a replica of Father Corby was placed at the battlefield in Gettysburg, and also an identical one on the campus at Notre Dame, honoring Corby's chaplaincy in the Civil War. He was one of 18 Holy Cross chaplains in the Civil War. So she knew that priests like Corby were getting recognition. And she also knew that in 1914, a Red Cross building in Washington, D.C. was dedicated to the memory of the women nurses in the Civil War. So not Catholic sisters, but lay women who had served as nurses. So Jolly thought, well, Catholic sisters should be recognized too. Jolly she thought it was an important project for the Ancient Order of Hibernians, because by her reckoning, she believed that 93% of Civil War nursing sisters had either been born in Ireland or were the daughters of Irish immigrants. She overestimated just a little bit. 51 out of the 63 Holy Cross sisters that nursed in the Civil War had been born in Ireland, about 80%. The War Department stipulated that absolute proof of the service rendered by nuns in the Civil War had to be secured before any site could be chosen or approval considered. So what Jolly did was single-handedly identify and validate the service of 100 sister nurses from Catholic women's congregations across the nation. She originally wanted it in Arlington Cemetery, but could not get it approved by the War Department, officially because the War Department prohibited monuments at Arlington that weren't dedicated to people who were actually buried there. So in the course of her research, Jolly came to Notre Dame and she became very good friends with Father Kavanaugh, then the president. Her son, in fact, enrolled as a student at Notre Dame, and he died tragically in April of 1917 of blood poisoning. And Father Kavanaugh traveled to Jolly's native Rhode Island for his funeral. But in any case, she did secure a site for this across from St. Matthew's Cathedral. So it wasn't in Arlington, it would be placed in St. Matthew's Cathedral. And as a result of her efforts, she was the first woman to receive an honorary doctorate at Notre Dame's commencement ceremony in 1918. Here she is at the dedication. This obviously meant a lot to her. She's sitting there and she's wearing her doctoral robes that she received at that honorary degree. Speaking as Boston's Cardinal William O'Connell. That's at the dedication of the monument that we talked about. She also wrote a book in which she talked about 21 congregations and told the stories of sisters who had nursed in the Civil War, including the Sisters of the Holy Cross, and some kind of graphic descriptions of what it was like to nurse in the Civil War, some kind of gruesome descriptions. It's a really remarkable book. But she wasn't content with just having sisters represented in the nation's capital. Federal law required that the War Department provide, upon request, official markers for the grave sites of people who had served in the war. And so she, again, almost single-handedly ensured that the Sisters of Holy Cross, their cemetery at St. Mary's College, those who had fought in the Civil War would have markers. And they arrived in November of 1919. I haven't been able to ascertain this. I've asked a number of Holy Cross priests, but I believe that I think it's possible that the sisters may have had these markers before the priest had those markers, or perhaps it was around the same time. But certainly at Holy Cross Cemetery on Notre Dame's campus, you can see the markers of the 16 Civil War chaplains in Holy Cross, as well as subsequent wars as well. So this is just a list that appears in her Nuns at the Battlefield of all the Holy Cross sisters that served, and notes the preponderance of Ireland as a birthplace. I want to also point out Sister Lydia Clifford, who's just an amazing story. She was not only a nurse in the American Civil War, but went on to be a nurse in the Spanish-American War. So just a really interesting person. At this dedication ceremony, Father Kavanaugh talked about Jolly as, well, he didn't name her. He decided not to name her. She has always been a woman, a mother of sons, who has been as an eloquent and zealous high priestess of faith and patriotism. But he said, for reasons of delicacy, I may not mention her name. So I want to use that as a transition to talk about not St. Mary's campus where the ceremony took place, but Notre Dame's campus, where Kavanaugh was, as we'll see, particularly concerned about women's delicacy. Oh, there's Sister Lydia's grave. So I'll go now to the funeral of Mother Mary Aloysius, Sister Mary Aloysius, where Kavanaugh had said that the history of sisters, Holy Cross sisters at Notre Dame would never be forgotten. So as I said, Mulcair had entered, Honora Mulcair had entered the Sisters of Holy Cross in 1845 and entered the Sisters of Holy Cross in 1875, one of many young Irish women for whom religious life in America offered a new life from the dismal prospects in the native land. In Kavanaugh's estimation, Sister Aloysius had such ability, this is a quote from him, that she might have been President of the United States. Instead, she taught Notre Dame's minims, grammar school students, for over 40 years at St. Edward's Hall on Notre Dame's campus. According to Kavanaugh, only Father Sorin himself had given more years of service to Notre Dame than Sister Aloysius had. Moreover, only Soren could rival Sister Aloysius in her zeal, enthusiasm, and talent. So Kavanaugh was a big fan of Sister Aloysius. However, he said she didn't need any kind of monument. There wasn't a way to remember her. And this is what he said. Someone has asked why the world has never erected a monument to any woman. The answer, he said, is that every great man that has ever lived is himself a monument to some good woman. That's a statement that may have made sense in 1916, but rings very hollow, to say the least, in the 21st century. I want to talk about Kavanaugh a little bit. Kavanaugh was very much a man's man. He had no problem building statues to Holy Cross priests. And in fact, it was during his presidency that the statue of Father Soren was placed at the entrance to campus. And as I mentioned, a replica of the Corby statue that had been at Gettysburg was placed in front of Corby Hall. Kavanaugh was also instrumental after he stepped down from the presidency. He became instrumental in raising money to commemorate Newt Rockne. Newt Rockne, after the football coach died in the plane crash, Kavanaugh raised money to build what became the Rockne Memorial on campus. And I think these quotes really that they used to raise money for this really help illustrate that Kavanaugh had no trouble remembering men, not only Holy Cross priests, but also men who were not Holy Cross priests, but had no problem building monuments to them. And again, a statement, this is from the 1930s when they were raising money for this. Manliness and religion have gone hand in hand in Notre Dame tradition from Father Soren on down to the present generation. Again, a statement that may have sounded okay in the 1930s, but does not sound okay for some time. And it's also not true in the sense that women were always on campus, at least almost from the beginning, and were an important part of Notre Dame becoming the university that it is today. As Kavanaugh and others acknowledged, they recognized this, but they didn't do anything to make sure that story would be remembered by future generations. Sister Aloysius was one of hundreds of Holy Cross sisters who lived and worked on Notre Dame's campus between 1843 and 1958. This is a story that is distinct from, although it's obviously intertwined with, the hundreds of Holy Cross sisters who lived and ministered at St. Mary's and continue, of course, to do so today. Kavanaugh knew how integral Holy Cross sisters on campus had been and would continue to be to the success of the institution he led. I remember the quote. He predicts that no chapter will be more heroic than the chapter devoted to sisters. But he said the record of their services would never be, this is a quote, inscribed on monuments of brass or marble, but etched on the hearts of grateful men and written in the books of God. So I just want us to think about this a bit for a minute, and think about, of course, sisters were performing this service out of their vocation, out of love for God. And for Kavanaugh, and he was not alone, for many others, and it's not even that in Catholic circles that this was true, but that sisters and women's work didn't need to be remembered because it was done out of this higher calling and they were getting their eternal reward. Well, and of course, people of faith, we believe that that's true, that eternal reward. But it's also important that it's remembered in this life as well. So citizens of this world, not only of the future one. So, as I said, the story of Holy Cross Sisters, this story of hundreds of women working for 115 years, remains largely unknown. In fact, I didn't really know about it. I'm someone that has spent about 25 years now trying to recover the stories of women who have been hidden in historical narratives. And this was a story that was literally right under my nose. There are two small plaques in a series of about 30 odd plaques on the Wall of Honor in the basement of Notre Dame's main building that commemorate the Sisters of the Holy Cross. But that's about it. And in fact, it's not only missing, it's not that there aren't monuments, but it's conspicuously absent from a monument that occupies a central place in Notre Dame's collective memory, the Founders Plaque. So we'll talk about that in a minute. I just wanted to show Frances Cabrini is represented at Notre Dame on the facade of the law school. Elizabeth Van Seaton, there's a statue of her in Knott Hall. Knott Hall was originally founded as an undergraduate dorm by a family from Maryland, and Seton died in Emmitsburg, Maryland, so that's why. And then we also have Joan of Arc. She is probably, next to Mary, the most the person most represented on Notre Dame's campus. This is the World War I memorial doors at Notre Dame. We call it the God Country Notre Dame doors because that's what's inscribed over the entrance. But Joan of Arc is in the sculptures in one of the niches here. So again, a war memorial. This was dedicated in 1924. Oh, there you go. You can see when it was first built, there were no statues, but they were added during World War II, actually. So Joan of Arc and then St. Michael the Archangel. So let's talk about the founder's plaque. So I start the article by a query that I received from a Notre Dame undergraduate who had gone on a landscape tour of campus with her architecture class and noticed how few women there were besides Mary. And she wrote to me and said, how can we remember more women? And she intended no slight against Mary, but she thought that there were surely other stories of women that could be commemorated. And they are, as I showed you, there are little pockets and little places, but not very much recalling the Sisters of the Holy Cross. So let's talk about the founder's plaque. If you've been to Notre Dame's campus, you've been to the spot, really the historic heart of campus, where the replica of the log chapel is. And then translations, an excerpt of a translated letter that Sorin wrote to Basil Moreau upon arriving on the shores of St. Mary's Lake in November of 1842. It's a wonderful letter. We quote it all the time, and justly so. This is the famous one where Sorin envisions a university that cannot fail to succeed, and he predicts that it will be a powerful means for good. But let's go back to the beginning and think about monuments as a statement of power. And remember that monuments always oversimplify, and often they actually distort or omit. They do not tell the whole story. In the case of the founder's plaque, the ellipses in the final paragraph obscure a forgotten and really complicated aspect of Notre Dame's history as it relates to the Sisters of the Holy Cross. When you look at translations of Sorin's original letter to Moreau, we see what words were redacted from the excerpt that was inscribed on the plaque. So this will give you an idea of this. I think this is not our story tonight, although it's an important story. These ellipses, he mentions that it's the center of the Indian mission. So in not including that on the plaque, we've left out Sorin's consciousness that his new mission was on the lands of indigenous people. Also elided from the founder's plaque, this is the thing we quote all the time, and justly so. It's a wonderful founding story. It's something to be proud of. But this college, he writes, cannot fail to succeed. But when you go to the original letter, we see that he added an important qualifier to that, provided that we receive assistance from our good friends in France. And by assistance, he meant not only money, but also vocations. And so here we go to something that's left out here, just absolutely just taken out. Once sisters come, whose presence is so much desired here, they must be prepared not merely for domestic work, but also for teaching and perhaps too for the establishment of an academy. And I should mention that the brothers were also written out of this as well. Within a year, 4 sisters did arrive from France. Sister Mary of the Heart of Jesus, age 19, Sister Mary of Bethlehem, age 45, Sister Mary of Calvary, age 25, and Sister Mary of Nazareth, age 21. Before long, other French women joined, and American women joined the Holy Cross mission in Indiana, and women from the United States. I just want to talk about 2 women who were referred to as Father Sorin's 2 hands in the 19th century, who were his partners in building Notre Dame. Mother Mary Ascension was a native of France who had joined the brand new Congregation of Holy Cross after being electrified by Basil Moreau's preaching. She was, by all accounts, just tremendously intelligent. And in fact, her superiors in France had pegged her to be a leader of the Mother House in France. She had expressed the desire to work in the Indiana mission, but they wanted her to stay and be a future leader there. But on one of his visits, Father Sorin was able to convince her and the congregation to let her come with him. And she worked at Notre Dame until her death in 1901. Her eulogy characterized her as the last of the pioneers. So Father Sorin was dead by that time. Father Corby was dead by that time. But so Lou was the one, Mother Mary Ascension was remembered as the person who had helped build a university where there shall never be any divorce between science and religion. I can't verify this. I haven't verified it yet, but I think John Zahn wrote that about her. So the pre-scientist, I believe that he wrote about her. Her mourner, when she died, the people that mourned her, her eulogist said that Mother Ascension may have lived in quiet obscurity, but she had been second only to Sorin in, quote, achieving the present greatness of Notre Dame. Nobody remembers Mother Mary Ascension. Now, Mother Angela, born Eliza Gillespie, Angela Boulevard is named after her, although that's not technically on campus. But Eliza Gillespie, this was another woman whose encounter with Sorin redirected her vocational path. This is a wonderful story. Eliza's brother Neil was one of Notre Dame's first undergraduate students and entered the congregation. In 1853, the 29-year-old woman was traveling with her mother from her native Ohio to Chicago, where she had intended to enter the Sisters of Mercy. They stopped off at Notre Dame to visit Neil, and Sorin encountered them at the front gate, and really just upon meeting Eliza, knew that how intelligent she was and how helpful she could be to Notre Dame. So he told her that she shouldn't enter the Sisters of Mercy, that God was directing her to enter the Sisters of the Holy Cross. So she did meet them and pray about it, and she did, in fact, enter the Sisters of the Holy Cross. Both of these women were at the center of a conflict that was foreshadowed by this final omission from the founder's plaque. And I have it in bold here. They must be prepared not merely for domestic work, but also for teaching. Now, we have no doubt that Sorin meant that sincerely when he wrote it. The educational mission of Holy Cross, education was crucial to the mission of Holy Cross. So, and he did, he supported the sisters' efforts to open an academy at Bertrand, Michigan. He purchased the property where that academy moved in 1855 on the present site of St. Mary's College. But Sorin's support for the sisters' educational work extended only so far. And once it started to interfere with his ambitions for Notre Dame, it reached its limit. In a letter he wrote in February of 1872, Sorin complained to Cincinnati's Archbishop that Holy Cross sisters had, up until about 10 or 15 years prior, performed all the work reserved to females on Notre Dame's campus, all the domestic work. Many of them, like Mother Angela, had departed for Civil War service, and he had been forced to hire outside help. He hoped that that would just be a temporary move, but not so. And he complained that since the close of the war, the sisters have multiplied their own houses and have been unable to give Notre Dame but half the number of hands really required, thereby incurring a permanent expense. So Sorin proposed to establish a new congregation that would be founded solely to supply the domestic needs of the University of Notre Dame. By forming an order to supply our own wants, he estimated that Notre Dame could save $5,000 annually. This plan obviously alarmed the Sisters of the Holy Cross at Notre Dame and at St. Mary's. One of the ones who protested was Sister Mary Compassion, who implored him to remember the firm bonds between the sisters, the priests, and the Brothers of Holy Cross, and abandon any plans to form a separate female congregation that would not be within the Holy Cross family. She wrote, "I, for one, and an Irish sister too, am much opposed to the separation. As much as I love St. Mary's, I'd be willing to spend the rest of my life at ND if by so doing I could preserve the union." Sister Mary Compassion had also nursed in the Civil War. Mother Angela and other Sisters of the Holy Cross worked to develop a compromise in which they pledged to send enough sisters to supply Notre Dame's domestic needs, even though it required them to hire more domestic help at St. Mary's. Sorin eventually agreed to a compromise that involved opening a second novitiate for Holy Cross sisters on Notre Dame's campus. So there was one at St. Mary's, but to open a second one on Notre Dame's campus. This was an episode that proved very hurtful to the sisters. It certainly doesn't reflect positively on Sorin, although his behavior was not unique when we think of him as an ecclesiastical superior of a group of religious women. So all sisters, most women's congregations struggled for autonomy while operating under obedience to their male superiors who did not always have their best interests at heart. The Sisters of the Holy Cross did struggle to gain autonomy over their own congregation, over their own placements. And a key person in this process was Mother Augusta Anderson, who had also been a Civil War nurse, and she had risen to become the first American Superior General of the congregation in 1889. She played a decisive role in securing the sisters' autonomy and permanent Vatican recognition of their constitutions, and had some epic battles with Sorin along the way. However, independence did not change the sisters' commitment to Notre Dame. And as I said in the beginning, the sisters continued to live and work on campus until 1958. At a mass marking the departure of the final Sisters of the Holy Cross, President Theodore Hesburgh assured the sisters that they and their predecessors would never be forgotten by Notre Dame's administrators, faculty, and students. You have been, he told them, the golden threads woven forever into the tapestry of Notre Dame's life. Reverend Arthur Hope, CSC, who had written Notre Dame's official history and thus appreciated better than anyone the value of sisters' cumulative service, delivered the homily at this departure mass. He was also almost certainly the author of this article that appeared in the Province Review in the same month that the sisters left. And you can see he kind of, he talks about the 115 years of labor and love on the part of the sisters. But in the article, he also talked about the conflict between Sorin and Sorin's really power play, where he tried to divide the congregation. But it's this, the great pity of this parting, which has long been foreseen and postponed, is that the coming generation will forget the debt. Is there any lasting way Notre Dame's debt can be paid? And here we have the dynamic I talked about, the idea that these women did it out of love, out of vocation, out of a service to God. Thank God, in one sense, there is no way. An earthly payment, a temporal payment, there is none. No human effort can recompense the Sisters of Holy Cross for what they have done to Notre Dame. And I think that that's true. That may be true. But I do think that the very least we can do is remember the sisters and tell their stories. As I wrote the article that was referenced earlier, I had in the back of my mind another one of the questions that Father Cope asked in this essay. He said, these Sisters of the Holy Cross, who even from an economic point of view, have given so much and asked so little, how shall we remember them? And here I'll go back to the findings of the Monument Lab and remember that monuments have always changed. It is within our power to change our commemorative landscape on Notre Dame's campus and beyond. A historian named Carl Becker once observed that history is what the present chooses to remember about the past. And I think today, in this moment, Notre Dame can consciously choose to remember its forgotten women. And this is something I've tried to do as campus is gearing up for the celebration of the 50th anniversary of the admission of undergraduate women, which actually resulted because of a failed merger between Notre Dame and St. Mary's, which is a separate story. But I think that this is something I've tried to do as we've celebrated that anniversary, which is an important anniversary, it is an important milestone, but it's important to remember that the women who arrived on campus in the fall of 1972 as undergraduate students were not even close to the first women on campus. And in fact, the first two women to receive an undergraduate degree from Notre Dame were two Holy Cross sisters in 1917, and many Holy Cross sisters and other sisters received those degrees. So again, these are just a reminder that I hope will encourage some discussion and certainly some thought. These are the findings of the national study, but I think they also reflect what can be true about our campus. And I just want to end my comments and move to questions by talking about this woman. This is a picture of her grave that I shot in the winter. Obviously, you can see the snow. Because I think we should not only remember the towering figures like Mother Ascension, Mother Augusta, Mother Angela, but also some of the essential workers. I think of this woman, Sister Agnella, born Julia O'Sullivan, another native of Ireland. She worked on the Scholastic for over half a century in the printing office, which was an important mission and ministry at Notre Dame. And I think it's within our power to tell a different story, to think about these sisters whose names are really lost to history. And as I said, it's true of brothers and other people as well. But is it possible to remember a different story? I I mentioned the student that had come to me about the lack of representations of women on campus other than Mary, how she didn't want to slight Mary. And I think sometimes that has been suggested, well, isn't Mary enough? And I just want to just share a colleague of mine who responded about that she said, if I know anything about Our Lady, she loves to see her light shine in new places. So in illuminating the story, this is not saying that Mary's not important. It's a university named after Our Lady, or all the things about her, but it's saying the story is much fuller and much more interesting, and much something that can inspire not only the women on campus today, but all people on campus today. And I think, as I've suggested, it extends far beyond Notre Dame's campus. So I'm going to stop there. I think we have some time for questions, and I hope I wish I could see you all, but hopefully you'll feel free to put your question ask your questions, and we can have a good conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cummings, for that absolutely outstanding presentation. I think that was incredibly enlightening, inspiring for all of us. Ladies and gentlemen, I do want to say that if you have any questions for Dr. Cummings, please do put them in the chat so that we can ask her your questions. We already have a couple coming in. Here's a great question. Dr. Cummings, could you recommend any sources where we can learn more about the early sisters?
The archives, that's what I did. You go to the Sisters of the Holy Cross archives or Notre Dame archives. And of course, there are congregational histories about the early histories, but they're not, there haven't been, they're very much internal histories. But no, I mean, what I uncovered about this, I did with the help of archivists at the Sisters of the Holy Cross, Sister Catherine Osmo and Sister Timothy at Kingston. That's how I found the stories of some of these women.
Mm. Excellent, wonderful. And the Sisters Archives is located
at St. Mary's College. Yeah. St.
Mary's College, wonderful. Okay, excellent.
And then there is a box of an archival box at Notre Dame related to the Sisters of the Holy Cross. So Mother Ascension, those who spent their entire ministry at Notre Dame, there's some correspondence and things there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Let's see here. A great question. Are there any scholarships in the sisters' names? It's a question we had come in.
That would be great. No, I think we should have the Mother Ascension Scholarship. I think, not that I know of. And I have to say, this article has gotten wonderful engagement from alums and from other Holy Cross institutions. It's not gotten as much engagement from Notre Dame's administration yet, but we're working on it. One of my one correspondent actually wrote to me and said she went to Notre Dame's development office right after this, and she wanted to give to something that honored the sisters. And she just said they're all named after men, mostly priests, but some. And so I think it would be wonderful to have a Sister Aloysius fund, a Mother Compassion fund, right? The woman that really tried to save the Union. I think that would be one way. So not only on the visual landscape, but in other ways that we have to just say their names and to remember who they are.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Another question, in your article, you referred, I believe, to the sort of forgetting of the sisters' legacy as a sin of omission. And what's the proper way, other than through something like a concrete monument, what are some ways that we can repent of that sin of omission? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sin of omission was actually my original title for this article, and the editor changed it. So, but I think I might write a book called Sins of Omission now, so it'll be okay. Not that wouldn't only be about the Sisters of the Holy Cross, but really about Catholic sisters more generally in the United States, how we forget them. So I think the first step in atoning for this sin is to help tell their stories, to encourage others to learn about them. But I do think Notre Dame could do quite a bit more to remember them, and I think that's something I've been working at. A number of the people have written me. They're like, "Well, how can I help? How can I, And they think I'm leading a movement or something. And I'm like, I just wrote an article, and it's wonderful. I mean, I hope it does go somewhere. But I should say, there are members of the Notre Dame administration that have complimented the article, and I hope it will lead to something. And in this moment where we are thinking very seriously about a major change in the campus landscape in 1972, we think more seriously about our past. And again, it's not just Notre Dame. It's the stories, I think, of Catholic sisters in particular, but often women whose work is undervalued and too easily forgotten. I mean, that visual I started with. I mean, this is in the United States. We have that. I hope if you're interested, you'll go to the findings of this, because there's all these interesting tidbits about it's not only that only 3 of the top 50 are women, but there are something like 22 statues in the audit. They found 22 statues in the country dedicated to mermaids, and only 2 dedicated to U.S. Congresswomen. I mean, so that's clearly that's a problem. So, I mean, I think it does require kind of a national effort to again, that last finding in the study. This does not accurately represent our history. This is not a full history of the United States. So it's not just a Catholic story. It's a broader story.
Sure. Larger trend. Absolutely. We have a couple comments coming in that I would like to share. Let's see. This was fantastic. I've heard so many names for the first time, which is sad. It is a sad reality that these sisters are not more well known. Thank you so much. This was eye-opening. Another one. Excellent. Thank you. Notre Dame is so much more than about Holy Cross. Priests, sisters, and brothers contributed greatly to Notre Dame, and all should be remembered. Amen to that. It is part of our duty to remember and honor their legacy.
Say it's not a zero-sum game. It's like, oh, remember sisters, and then that takes away from the priest. But we can remember lots of people. I think there's stories of the indigenous people that were there first that need to be integrated more into the story. So I think everybody wins when we tell more inclusive stories.
Absolutely, and it's about preserving and promoting the history of the family of Holy Cross. Everyone, absolutely. And
recognizing, I'll just say one more thing, recognizing that there's some painful aspects of that story. And there were conflicts, and that's part of the story as well. But we can't come to terms with it if we don't even know the details about it.
Right. Absolutely. To tell history well, you got to go to some of the darker chapters. Absolutely. Well, Dr. Cummings, thank you so much for this incredible presentation. We have a couple slides that we wanted to share just to close out the evening that we're going to share with you all. Let's see. Wonderful. So I just want to give you all a quick reminder about some upcoming events from the Holy Cross Institute and from some of our Holy Cross schools. So the Holy Cross Conference for Student Leaders is coming up at St. Edward's University from June 8th through the 12th, and then at Holy Cross College in Notre Dame from June 22nd through the 26th. If your schools or students are interested in participating, you can contact Rob Thomas at Notre Dame Sherman Oaks High School. His email address is there, or Brother Bob Livernoy, and his email address is there as well. And friends, if y'all have any evaluation for tonight's webinar that you'd like to give us, any kind of feedback, please, you can use this QR code or the link in the chat to give us some feedback. We would love to hear from you. And I want to close, friends, with just this quote that we love to close with. And this is a quote from Father Blessed Basil Moreau. Education is a work of resurrection. It is meant to be a liberation from the darkness of ignorance. It is meant to be a vehicle for the transformation of society. And it is meant to be a process that helps to make all things, especially the persons engaged in it, new. And so we want to say thank you one more time to our incredible speaker, Dr. Cummings, for this absolutely wonderful presentation. Thank you so much for blessing us with your time, with your expertise. We have a couple more comments coming in. Wonderful presentation. Another one, this was great. Thank you. Another one, thank you so much, everyone. Another, what a fabulous night. Thank you, Dr. Cummings. Another, thank you very much. So we are so incredibly grateful to you for this presentation. And if anyone would like to contact any of us here at the Holy Cross Institute, all of our contact information is here on this page. I just want to say, friends, to close, thank you so much. God bless all of you. And as we always like to end, let us remain disciples with hope to bring. Thank you so much.